everyone, so this is a little late. I will be doing my October wrap-up. For the month of October, I read 6 books. I didn't get to read all the books I would have liked, but I think I did a pretty good job. So let's get started. The first book I read was Vengeful by V.E. Schwab. This is the second book in the Villain series. The first one is Vicious. I liked Vengeful, but I did like Vicious a lot more. I liked that we got to meet more characters with superhuman abilities, because each superhuman abilities kind of go with your personality, so there aren't really generic abilities like flying or invisibility. They're very unique, and I liked learning more about them. However, I just thought there was just too many new characters, and they were kind of introduced all at once and got involved so quickly that I kind of really didn't like that. But so far it's a good series. The second book I read was In the Tall Grass by Stephen King and Joe Hill. This is a horror novella about a brother and sister who pull over on the side of the road because they hear a little boy screaming for help. And this boy says he is lost in this big field of tall grass. And so the brother and sister go to help him out. And once they are in there, they get lost themselves and from each other. This book isn't for everyone. It is a bit disturbing, and it does have gore. And you have read this book or watched the Netflix movie, there is one particular scene that isn't for everyone. It is very, very disturbing, and for those who've seen it know what I'm talking about. So just be prepared if you're going to read this novella. Reading this, you do get that sense of dread because, especially when a kid, you kind of know that feeling of being lost and thinking you'll never be found. So you kind of get that feeling while reading this book. And the boy's mother is also in here, and she's telling them to be quiet because he will hear you. So not only are you lost, now you have to worry about who the heck is he, because you don't know. The third book I read was The Shining by Stephen King. This is a horror book about Jack Torrance, who gets a job at the Overlook Hotel as the off-season caretaker. And so he, his wife, and his son go out there to live there to take care of the hotel. And while they're there, there is something very sinister about this hotel. So I was most excited to read this book. I heard that the book is way better than a movie, and I loved the movie. And I do agree this book is so much better, but I'm going to take the movie and the book as two different things, because the movie is nothing like the book. They have a few things that are similar, but mostly it is just a completely different story. It is not a book to movie adaptation at all. And even the director of The Shining didn't take Stephen King's suggestions, so that's why it was so different. This is one of the best books I've read by Stephen King. I loved that not only you saw these characters lose their sanity from isolation, but also their growing fear of this hotel. Their fear seemed so real. And I really liked that the thing to be afraid of wasn't a monster or a creature or anything like that, or a ghost. It was this hotel. The hotel is alive, and that is a very scary thought. So I highly recommend The Shining. I listened to the audio along with reading the book, and the audiobook was fantastic. The next book I read was The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager. This is about Emma, who when she was a kid, she went to summer camp, and at this summer camp, all her friends disappeared. And now she is much older, living in the city as an artist. and the owner of the camp hires her to be the painting teacher at the camp. And Emma agrees because she wants to know what happened to her friends all those years ago. I really enjoyed this book. I liked it way better than Final Girls, which is his other book. This author is good at building suspense and making you get sucked into so you want to read more. The author goes back and forth between when Emma was at camp when she was young and now, and so you kind of always find bits and pieces out during each time, and so you just kind of want to read more and more just to piece everything together and finally know what happens. And so it does hook you in. The 5th book I read was the Amnesia Horror by Jay Anson. This is a true crime horror novel. This is about the Lutz family who move into a house in the town of Amityville. And once they do, a bunch of paranormal stuff happens to them, and after 28 days, they flee. And this is their story about how the house is possessed by evil. I did a whole other video about this book, but overall, I thought it was just okay. I really do not know if I believe them. There's a bunch of evidence to show otherwise, but the author believed them, and he did a really good job at portraying this family's fear. And the last book I read in the month of October was Pet Sematary by Stephen King. This is about Louis Creed, who moves his family to rural Maine from Chicago. This family becomes very close to their neighbor, particularly Judd, and Judd kind of shows them the land and takes them back in the trail behind their house, and there they find a pet cemetery. And Judd explains that this has been here for many, many years. The neighborhood kids built this cemetery for their pets, especially because the road in front of the Creed's house is very busy, and they've lost a lot of pets to that road. And one day, sadly, Louis finds their daughter's cat has been killed. It was another casualty of the road, and so Judd tells him he will help Louis bury him, and so he takes him in the back of the woods, but then he goes deeper and deeper into the woods, where there is an ancient Indian burial ground. But he will soon find out that that burial ground has sinister properties. I loved this book. I've read a couple of Stephen King books before. I've read The Shining and Pet Sematary, and they were good, but I never understood the hype that was Stephen King. But these books made me totally understand. Like, The Shining and Pet Sematary were fantastic, and I definitely understand his hype now. Last year, I sadly lost my cat to the road in front of my house. Just reading that scene destroyed me. I was bawling my eyes throughout it, and I guess that just shows how great of a writer he is, because it brought back all the memories, because it felt very real. My favorite character was Judd, the neighbor. He was just so lovable, and I loved the relationship between him and Louis. I didn't like that, the evil was because of the Indian burial ground. That's very cliche and kind of offensive. But this was written in the 80s, and I think that was the time where everyone was using those, and so I'm not going to blame him for that. However, I did not like the ending. And I've always heard Stephen King is horrible at endings. And this book definitely proved that. I thought the ending was very anticlimactic. He was building up to something very big, but then it kind of fell flat. I finished being like, okay, that's how it ends. So I do warn you on that, but the rest of the book was great. So those are all the books I read in the month of October. Like and subscribe, and I'll see y'all later. Bye!